Thank you, Jared. Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for coming to our event, Apache Junction, Mesa and Queen Creek, Imagine the Future. For those of you who've been watching the news, you know that last fall that the land was auctioned off by the State Land Department, and it's a rather large swath of land. We know there'll be somewhere around 26 or 2,700 homes planned for that area. And one of the things that happens when you're in Mesa looking across the street at that land is people say, what's going to happen over there? What's going in over there? And right now, for a very long time, we've said, I don't know, it's desert. Well, today, you're going to find out who your clients can speak to, who you can speak to, who can give you the proper information so that you and your clients actually know what's going to be happening over there, not just in the next year, but over the next, say, 20 to 50 years. And these are the people that we want to bring to you so that you have that knowledge and expertise and you can be the source of the source. You can tell your clients who to speak with and where to go to for the information. So with that, I would like to start introducing our panelists today. We have with us from the city of Apache Junction, Bryant Powell, City Manager. Thank you. And from the city of Mesa, we have Economic Development Director, William Jebjaniak. And from the city of Queen Creek, whoopsie daisy, we have City Manager John Cross.
So they're a town.
A town, I'm sorry. It even says town here. And from the Arizona State Land Department, we have Mark Edelman. So I want to thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you taking this time. Just to let you know, we do not have a big clock in this room, so to make sure we're on time, I will be checking my watch. So just know that that's what's going on here, keeping us on track. I am going to start with Mr. Powell from Apache Junction. Let's start with, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be the city manager of Apache Junction.
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be back together and to see everyone. So I'm a third-generation Arizonan. I was kind of interested in the question if there's anybody here that's not from the Valley. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a really small rural cotton farming community called Safford, Arizona, mm-hmm. in Graham County. My parents are school teachers. My mom taught home ec for 30 years. My dad's a band director. How does a son of educators become a city manager? And for me, it was all about learning and realizing when I had an opportunity to be outside our country, what blessings and what opportunity we have. Where I grew up, we never worried about water, never worried about the quality of that water, never worried about the ability to deal with sewer, wastewater. It happened. And while I lived in Ecuador for 2 years, not just a couple weeks, but for 2 years of my life, I found out that the inability for the people to get together as a government or a group to bond together, is the word I like to use, or to have some sort of social organization where generations bonded together, kept them from having public health and public safety. So that's what drove me towards, well, why? Why were we able to do it? Why were our grandfathers able to do that? Well, actually, it's because they had trust in their governance. They had trust in the ability to, what I call intergenerational equity, with the government or the institution, the ability to bond long-term projects like wastewater treatment plants or sewer. And so when I went to college, I ended up getting a degree. I have an undergraduate in Spanish and political science, and my degree is a master's degree at the BYU Marriott School of Management in Public Administration, and a background in finance on public finance and bonding. And so worked for the city of San Antonio for 3 years as what's called a budget analyst, and at there learned a lot about how big projects can be together, and over a long time, how future generations and current generations work together to pay off the debt. And so a lot of time in our world, we hear how horrible a property tax is or how horrible a tax is. But if you have trust in the system and over a long period of time, that can help bring really safe conditions. So for me, at that point, I was sold. I wanted to get in. I left being a Spanish teacher and a coach and decided to get into public finance and ended up being a budget analyst. And then about 21 years ago, came back to my Arizona and was an assistant to the city manager, and then became an assistant city manager. And about 6 years ago, our city council said, hey, would you consider? And I really wanted the opportunity, and now I've been the city manager in Apache Junction now for 6 years. And we could talk more about what's coming up there, but that's it.
Wonderful, thank you. And Mr. Jadriniak, let's talk a bit about yourself and how you came to be the Economic Development Director for Mesa.
I'm not sure I want to follow that. So my story isn't quite that interesting. It's very inspiring, however. But I've been at the city of Mesa about 14 years. I was recruited from, I was back east. I'm a native from Pennsylvania. But I got into this economic development business 30 years ago, doing a lot of things in two cities, Manchester, New Hampshire, and Richmond, Virginia. And based on the success in those communities, I find myself here in the desert and enjoying ourselves, and also looking back at that time going, you can tell the differences between different economies in different parts of the country, how things are handled differently, and it has been quite the ride, and looking forward to more going forward. So, but I also have a couple of master's degrees, undergrad in accounting, so I can appreciate the finance side of this. But I also have an MBA and a master's in community economic development as well, and lead a team of about 15 people. So.
That's great, thank you. And Mr. Cross, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be the manager for the town of Queen Creek.
Thank you, Liz. Appreciate the opportunity. It's a real pleasure to be with everyone here today. It is, as Bryant said, great to be back together. For me, I'm a native Ohio, Northern Ohio, and I know that we're sort of starting the NFL football season, and I was born in Canton, Ohio, so Northern Ohio, thank you very much. But with all due respect to Texas, pro football and the NFL is really Ohio-centered. But nevertheless, I've actually been in Arizona since 1971, moved out when I was 3, when my dad took a job with the Arizona Department of Transportation. And probably with respect to my interest in the public sector, really, oftentimes does start with your parents. And I initially, frankly, rejected pursuing public service, but it was through my undergraduate process and doing some internships with a smaller communities local downtown association that I felt there's really some pathways there to a career that really are quite rewarding from an intellectual standpoint, that I decided to pursue, this particular profession at some point in time. But I have an undergraduate degree in business management, ironically enough, as well as public policy. So how those two, areas of study intersect are something that's we sometimes deal with on a daily basis, and a master's degree in public administration from Arizona State. But it's really been a wonderful ride for me here in Queen Creek. I didn't start my career in Queen Creek, although at times it feels like I did, because I actually started back in 1996 in the community, which is just over 25 years ago. And it has been a wonderfully enriching ride from a whole variety of perspectives, to help work with wonderful mayors and councils who were quite visionary, including the current mayor and council, that really have an interest to see through sort of the core underpinnings of the culture and the vision of the community for the future, and try to make the place a very different place than any other community within the valley. So when I first started, there was about just under 3,000 in population, and today we're a little over 70,000 in population, on our way to depending on what forecast you read and what happens from a land use standpoint, perhaps about 120,000, maybe as much as 130,000. Over the next 25 years. That doesn't happen overnight. I make sure I mention that to community groups, because they're already sort of nervous about the growth that's happening now. But for me, city management's really been a very interesting career. Every day is a very different day. We're very excited about the partnership we have with the State Land Department. And I've been manager in Queen Creek since 2006, technically, and then formally appointed in 2007 after an interim stint. So I've been in the role for a little while. So I've very much appreciated the leadership position, helping grow the organization, and be part of the visionary sort of experience that our many mayors and councils have really tried to embody over the years. So thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Edelman, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself? And on your description at the State Land Department, it says urban development. So maybe mention what that is as well.
Great, thanks Liz, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm here on behalf of the State Land Commissioner, Lisa Atkins, who sends her greetings. A little bit about myself. I'm originally a native Californian. I've been in Arizona for 27 years. I came here after teaching school in Central California. If you know Kings County, you'll know that it's very similar to Casa Grande or Florence, so that's California flyover country. So, so before anyone throws tomatoes at me up here, that's the part of California I'm from. I came here to come back to school, to go to grad school at ASU, get my degree in planning. Came out of grad school, and the State Land Department brought me on board in 1997. Spent a couple of years with them, went into private consulting where I learned a little bit about how things actually get vertically constructed, because up until then I had no clue. I think my first day on the job at the Land Department, I had to ask, what is a lift station? Because I had no idea, Sometimes things don't flow downhill.
Yeah.
So worked in home building for a time, worked in consulting. In the fall of 2008, I'm speaking to a room of real estate professionals, so I don't think I need to put any context around that date. My time in home building came to an end. And the State Land Department was hiring for my old position. So went back 11 years later, took the same staff planner job I had left, and have been there ever since, working my way through the ranks. And also, my time in home building helped me understand a little bit about what were some of the complexities about the land that we had, some of the agreements that the department had gotten into over the years, a little bit of the not knowing what you don't know, and then being able to bring that private sector experience back to the department and help manage the portfolio, which at that time was growing again because we were having land returned to us. Lots of people coming in, leaving the keys on the counter saying, sorry, doesn't work for us anymore, here you go. So what do you do when you take back zombie subdivisions? That was a big part of my early days in the mid-2000s at the Land Department. My title, as Liz referred to, I've worked my way up to the point where now they've kind of got me in a role that's called Executive Consultant for Urban Development. But really what that means is that I spend most of my time, I do not have a staff, I spend most of my time working on the larger projects. TSMC was one of my projects that where we located the big chip manufacturer in North Phoenix. Nationwide in North Scottsdale is one of my projects. I've done the zoning on that for over probably coming up on 20 years now, even reaching back into my private sector experience. So I've learned that a lot of these things keep coming back. Regardless of where I work, I'm back on the same pieces of land over and over again. So bringing that experience to bear now, and I mentioned TSMC, that really opened the doors, and I think you have probably all felt that too. We were just talking about that before the program began, but that really put a spotlight on Arizona, and now we have all these high-tech manufacturers, chip manufacturers, battery storage, data centers, all these things that are coming here and really growing that economy that when I first came here 27 years ago, that was the thing you heard the most was, can't we be anything but call centers? And here we are, 27 years later, and boy, I am so proud to have been part of all this and to work with all these communities and all these great folks that I'm honored to be up here with today.
Thank you. So part of having these folks here is understanding there's also staffs that work with them, and we do have some of the city staffs within our audience today. So if you are a member of a city staff, could you please stand so that we can see you and welcome you?
Hi, Janine.
Yay!
Apache Junction. We have some council members here as well.
Okay. So these are folks that can help you as well when you go to these cities. Just want to make sure you understood that as well and knew who they were. Mr. Powell, we're going to start with you. Tell us a bit about Apache Junction, the annexation of the 6,600 acres, and everybody knows that D.R. Horton purchased that auction land last December. But did they come to you, or do you go to them, or how did that work out?
Thank you. Yeah, so that's a great question, and I hope I could do really it's complicated. It's been something we've been working on at the city for over 20 years. So when you think about land ownership in the East Valley and you look at a map, it's often the case that you will see designated a color that's out in Apache Junction southeasterly, it's blue. It's owned by the state land department. That goes back to 1912, goes back to the ability in the western states. And so the key to our work here on why or how or when that happens is so connected to the state land. For Apache Junction, that means you may look at Apache Junction and think, well, it's on the cusp 20 years ago, 1999, 2000, when we were kind of seeing the wave of growth come towards East Mesa, Queen Creek, and also Santan Valley. Why didn't Apache Junction? We're still at 40,000 people. We were about 35,000 people at the time. And I go back to, well, it's the state land. The ownership of the who owns the land is so important. And so as we've been connected with the landowner and in conjunction with our partners, Queen Creek and Mesa, we've worked very closely over the years on trying to figure out where's the smartest place for where the sewer would go, or where's the best place for our water treatment plants. And so we've coordinated, and about 6 years ago, our two city councils with Queen Creek and AJ designated that per resolution that we wanted to be able to work together in the area of the state land, and of course worked with the landowner. Because sometimes if you do follow where the city boundaries go, it could be very contentious. Sometimes city councils get very wanting to hold on to that. And in our case, because the land there's 275 square miles that goes all the way towards Florence. What an opportunity to lay these infrastructures in line, like north-south freeway. Where would that go out in Pinal County? Where would the 24 go? And so before we even got to thinking about annexation, we were working closely. And in that, we said the 24. So if you're familiar with Phoenix Mesa Gateway, you get out towards Ellsworth and it stops. Well, in about a year from now, ADOT, another partner in this process, is going to be able to get it to Ironwood Road, which is 1 mile into Pinal County and also into what we would say now, our southern boundary, which then laid the discussion, okay, well, where would we do an annexation with the state land? John, was it about a year ago you guys annexed up to?
A little over a year.
Yeah, but Mark helped me with that.
Yep.
And then we're actually about a month away from annexing. So to annex state land, it's a big deal. So as we've talked to different developers, and we've even had what I call two stutter steps on this way back in 2009, 2008. There was a developer who came and purchased, and the way that works is they come to the state land department. They come to the owner and say, hey, we want to start the process to explore and then get it to annexation. That did not happen. It was a group out of Las Vegas, went away, and then about 5 years ago, there was some interest again from the folks that were actually talking to state land to get it to auction again. So finally, we were able to designate the line where that would be. Then we were trying to figure out, okay, well, where would get it annexed? And to get it state land annexed, it's the state treasurer, state land commissioner,
Treasurer,
and the
governor, and attorney general.
And the commissioner, and it's a special meeting. They meet once a year.
Not even that.
Not even that, okay. And they met a couple years ago and they said, okay, AJ, Queen Creek, Mesa, you guys are getting it organized. They had kind of sent a message to us, get organized out there. We now will say this is the area that is in Pinal County. This is the designated for the planning area. And that map that you all have is our general plan. It's this one.
Yep.
And it's one that designates us. At one point, we had thought we might go down to Germain Road, but in working with Queen Creek, we said, let's just go to the freeway, let's work together, let's come together, and let's stop at what we call the Fry Road alignment, which is now the 24. Long story short is that then triggered the ability for the private sector to then, because it's so much, and if you've ever tried to purchase state land, it's a significant process, right, Mark? And you have to kind of have everything set up. And the trick is, it all goes to auction. You don't know if you're a developer whether or not you're going to get it. And back in 2006, when it happened, actually the group Jim Rhodes and the group from Australia bid on it, and the one that got it was the one that wasn't doing it. And not too unsimilarly, this last time in November when the auction went, it was like 5 different groups that bid, and it was one of those things that was very interesting and ended up landing for $245 million for 4 square miles, which is not the entire piece. So if you look on the map, you'll see a big, huge area, and it's 6,600 acres. The area that was auctioned is from Elliott Road on the north, Ray, 2 miles south, Meridian on the west, to Idaho to Ironwood. So it's 4 squares, 4 sections of land, and that's the area that was what we call the auction piece. Here in a month, we're going to annex all the way down, but it's only the actual part that'll start the growth a year from now will be those 4 square miles.
Great.
Hope that helps.
Thank you
I don't
for
know if there's any
clarifying,
follow-up
because
questions.
we have
Jen.
seen all sorts of numbers on how much land was actually auctioned off. We've seen 4 different numbers for that across the media, so thank you for specifying that. When we look at this, and you've sort of touched on this, but what were some of your initial concerns and your initial discussion points before you decided that, yep, you wanted to go forward and try and annex this land? And what was the process that you as a city followed?
So that area, the initial concern was we had planned for what was called Lost Dutchman Heights, which was parallel to the 60. The private sector said to the city of AJ, that's not where it's going now. The private sector said we're actually going to go more east-west out of Eastmark. Does that make sense? So instead of kind of like going, if you go out the freeway, going southwardly, the private sector, we're going to go there. So I was concerned because we had kind of started thinking for a long time, this is how we're going to set up our sewer water. But worked with the infrastructure guys, said no problem. The other concern was just making sure everybody on this panel knew we worked together, that this was changing. And just making sure that those, the ability to serve water was probably right there on the top 3. So, and we had been planning, and then the part of the reason to designate 4 square miles is we know for sure we have that water to get going on it.
Great, thank you. If you are interested and aren't sure quite what ADOT is planning for the SR24, you can go to weservegad.org. That's our government affairs website, and under maps and transportation, I have the link into the ADOT studies that they're doing and the pathways and all the work that they've been doing. So you can update yourself very easily, and so can your clients. So let's go over to Mr. Jibgeniak. Mesa is across the street from the land that's being annexed. And so the houses that will be built there will definitely be impacting Mesa. So what do you see as the impact on Mesa in the near term, and how is that changing, impacting, or influencing the planning for your city?
Thanks, Liz. And I think that it really isn't going to change our planning from really a whole lot. We're pretty much planned out. That southeast corner of Mesa is one of our employment areas. You're going to see north of the 24 be a little bit more residential. South will be all employment, all the way down to Germain Road. So when I look at the area from Ray to up to Elliott, and I'm looking at what's happening in Eastmark, and I'm looking at parts of Eastmark as a master plan, and I've gone through 3,200 acres of, what are you going to do with part of the old GM proving ground? Eastmark's 3,200 acres. Cadence is 1,000 acres. So as you can see, you have to master plan these communities out. So from our planning, we sort of have it all figured out. We're working on infrastructure. We're now seeing some of the fruits of the labor of planning ahead, starting to invest in infrastructure. You're seeing these jobs, and you mentioned TSMC, Mark. We're seeing supply chain in deep Southeast Mesa. Now think about that. Then you got Intel expanding. And then add to the growth, Facebook's $800 million investment. So you start to see what's going on in that part of the city. My number one issue, workforce. What do houses do? Provide workforce. So as long as we're planned out and done properly, and they learn to coexist, we have fun on north and south side of Germain Road. But the whole idea now is that starts to come together and they can coexist. You need employment in the East Valley so people don't have to travel westerly. And that will keep people in a workforce. This housing will provide workforce that's much in big demand for all of us, for all 3 economic development initiatives.
Great. So just in case you are not familiar, TSMC is Taiwan Semiconductor, and that plant is going to be located at the 43rd Avenue alignment in roughly Dove Valley, up in the northwest Phoenix, that corner right there, that area right there. So you can look on a map and find that pretty easily, but that's what we're talking about. And all of the suppliers to that, the support suppliers to that type of factory is what brings in all those amazing jobs across our valley. So that's what we're referring to. Thank you. And then, Mr. Cross, you have a ton of building going on in your town, and you're very close to the SR-24 and those improvements. You have a lot of transportation changes going on in your town as well. So what impacts will this annexation have on your own town's transportation planning? Have you changed anything or made anything different?
Well, thanks, Liz. I appreciate the question. Brian is exactly right. We do a lot of coordination among cities and towns, and including with the city of Mesa. And probably next to public safety, transportation is I would say, a very, very close second in terms of the types of infrastructure that we spend a lot of time on collaborating and coordinating. So there is going to have to be some additional, I think, work relative to what the alignment look like north of the 24. There's some logical ones on the 1 mile sections that have been mapped for many, many years. And our understanding is that the development group will be respecting that with some probably minor modifications. So from a transportation planning standpoint, we're not too overly concerned with respect to the interface of what they're proposing and how it might relate or connect with Queen Creek. Because a lot of that traffic north of the 24 will, or some probably as it heads a little bit farther south of the 24, will feed to the 24 and then probably continue to head westerly towards whatever their destination is. The other issue from an economic development standpoint is that depending on the timing of when non-residential happens in the community north of the 24, we're fairly well established with a lot of non-residential with large shopping centers in the community. So what we're looking at is for the foreseeable future, there's the likelihood with the proper transportation corridor south of the 24, of course, being able to come, at least for a period of time, into Queen Creek. I know Brian's is concerned about that from a sales tax standpoint, but I think that could be a reality, for the initial years, again, depending on the timing of some of that non-residential, that happens in that community. And you mentioned the State Route 24 or Brian did, I think. It is opening about a year from now, pretty much exactly a year from now. And we're working with Pinal County and Mesa for opening up the corridor south of the 24 on Signal Butte and then Meridian. And then Mesa's coming back I think it's about a year after that, for widening of Ellsworth Road. So that region will have, tremendous additional alternative routes, particularly for Santan Valley, but obviously the Queen Creek community, to be able to access the 24. And very much is helping sort of spur some of the investment considerations that border on the south side for Queen Creek because of where we've annexed there and this other infrastructure in place. So, and the last thing is public safety. I'll just mention that. Superstition Fire Medical District's part of the automatic aid system. Our fire department does coordinate with them, and our understanding is that there are some stations planned within the community. And that's going to be important, obviously, for service response times and whatnot, because of could be some implications on Queen Creek to service that area, depending on the timing of those new stations up into that new master plan community. So it's something that additional coordination necessary, not something that probably even within the next 12 months has to be absolutely finalized, but just another issue on the list of coordination. So.
And Liz, let me just chime back in here. Go back to transportation for a minute, because the two communities have worked together. John talked about Meridian and Signal Butte and Ellsworth. When we passed the bond a year ago for infrastructure work, and a lot of the roads are in Southeast Mesa, but we timed it on purpose, working so that you're not going to tie up the three major routes coming out of Queen Creek all at the same time. So let's get 24 done, make that connection, make it happen, and then go back and catch Ellsworth. But that's the kind of collaboration between all three communities, which makes it really worthwhile. And I think Chris does a nice job working with both of them along the way. So.
Yeah, and Liz, I really
Yes,
appreciate
absolutely.
that because it is a coordination. I don't know if anybody here has to drive Ironwood Road.
That's pretty good. Stand-up comedian.
Yeah, well, I see it. I live there, and our police cannot wait. I mean, it can't come soon enough. Guadalupe baseline every day. There's an accident. It goes to public safety, and the coordination can't come soon enough. And then as we get that happening, then we can see these other dominoes start to happen, and then we'll plan around and deal with Ironwood, Elliott, Warner, Ray, into Mesa.
Yep.
Great staff. We just coordinate all those efforts.
So what you're hearing right now is that the cities are working so closely together and have and will continue it. And I will tell you, having spoken with other government affairs directors at other associations across this country, this is rare. So we take it for granted that our cities will actually talk to each other. Turns out that's not normal. So be very grateful for this.
That's very true. That's true. Very true.
So I am going to ask this of Mr. Powell, but I would also like to throw this open to everyone on the panel. There is going to be a lot of housing, and you're going to see what type of jobs do you see locating here because of that housing? What type of mix will be seen? Small, large, industrial manufacturing, retail was mentioned earlier. In your cities, what do you foresee this being? And let's start with Apache Junction.
It's a great one. So initially for us, we are where they have been. We need to generate the people. We need people. We need folks to come and build the base. We need a great school system. And so for us, this is our beginnings. This is where Chandler was 40 years ago, Queen Creek and, well, Mesa 100, right? And so we're now at the point where we can see that start to build the corridors for the 24 and our north-south, which we haven't talked about. The residents of Pinal County, you're familiar with the 101, the 202, the 303. Well, about 3 years ago, the citizens decided to pass a tax, say, hey, we see that investment so necessary in Pinal County for what I call our 404. It's not called that. But if you look on the big picture of a market, you know, so the 404, and it's working with ADOT, working with the Federal Highways Department on Mountain View Road. If you go easterly past Ironwood, another 4 miles, is a road called Mountain View Road. That's almost the end of AJ, but it's the beginning of the unincorporated area called Gold Canyon, and then it shoots down south. And so those transportation corridors, working with our city council and the goals of our community and the general plan of future industrial that I see today, when we talk about 50 years, the wonderful work of Mesa. You know, we were, my staff, Janine and some council members, we were walking, seeing just these beautiful places, you know, off Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport, which we're a member of. That's where those big employer spaces will be for us down the road. But initially, we'll have some commercial areas for retail, and then in conjunction with Queen Creek, we'll see how that kind of works. And the market, for me, is always so important. What is the market going to do? So much has changed with online. So if you're not familiar, the ability for cities and towns to retain their own sales tax now, instead of exporting, can be done through your online purchases. So residential isn't going to be perfect. We're going to obviously need our sales tax. But the ability for people to have the sales tax come back to their cities and towns for police and fire and other services is there now through the court cases. And we're seeing those revenues there. And to city managers, it makes us feel a little better when we bring more residential at first. So that's what we'll see. And then we'll see some light office and some smaller builders. But we're still hoping to support some of our economic folks that have been part of AJ on our Apache Trail to the Superstition Mountains. We want them to have not just seasonal business. We want them to be able to see some of that come in. So that's kind of some of our goals.
And Mesa?
So I guess what I see is very much a continuation. I look at East Market as an example. Great community. But it also has an employment piece to it. It has that retail component. It has a heavier industrial piece, what I call light industrial. But it has hospitality, it has some shopping. It's going to have some more retail here, hopefully in the next year or so, as that starts to come back. But that's what I see. It's a master plan community. You're going to have to develop spaces for all of it. You're going to have demand for light industrial. You've got to plan for that. I fully understand our numbers went up during the pandemic from a sales tax side. So why is that? Because of that exact sale. So housing certainly helps tell that story. And you think about a paradigm shift. You know, when I first arrived 14 years ago, we were focused just on the sales tax. Now we have focused on high quality, high wage jobs, which brings a demand for housing. And that housing does create that ultimate sales tax. But you have all that other economic benefit that you have achieved now. So what I see is a little bit of everything. You're going to see residential predominantly, but you're going to see a need for the retail because the residential folks will demand it. You're going to need that hotel. You're going to need a different quality of hotels, meaning full service, limited service. You're going to also need places for these folks to work. And usually a higher value job, higher wage job, is at a level that may not come in a retail environment. So you have to think about all those things and then plan the infrastructure. And we gave D&B at the time that owned Eastmark a lot of flexibility in their zoning. And they can move components around unless it's a major change. So that's worked out, but that's why, you know, on the northern end of Eastmark, we're anchored with Apple and now Facebook and a few other things. But one of the things that drove that tech corridor was the amount of infrastructure, not just roads, but you had heavy power and water and sewer right there as well. So those are some of the things to think about going forward.
And Queen Creek.
It's been very interesting. You know, with me being in the community since '96, I would say I was thinking about this question quite a bit of late. You know, the first 25 years of the community, and we incorporated in '89, so I guess the first 31 years or so at this point, technically, has been building that base, and that base being residential, which naturally comes at a fairly quick pace here within the Phoenix market and the region. But our job as a community has really been building the infrastructure and trying to shape and create that mosaic for the vision of the future. And a year from now, we'll have 3/4 of our entire road system completely constructed and widened. So there's been a major commitment to do that, as well as the major components of the utility system. So what we're seeing now, it's been very, very fascinating to us. When we annexed the state lands a little over a year ago or so, we did a master plan with the State Land Department, wonderful partner for communities, and we really do appreciate the relationship. And it's allowed us to really kind of walk out on the balcony, if you will, and look at some of the future and maybe look at areas of flexibility and risk maybe differently than maybe we did in the past. So in that particular area south of the 24, from a jobs perspective, we had an approved master plan that was more mixed use, but predominantly residential at the time, that's been fully approved, allowed for flexibility, moving around different parcels to be able to adjust to the trends of the land use. But within the last 8 months, we are dealing with 8 major employers for that entire area south of the 24, adjacent to Meridian. So in theory, it could have the entire 4,200 acres that Queen Creek annexed be entirely an employment corridor. So we had forecasted prior to really the start of this calendar year, a forecast of about 7,000 jobs that was in that state lands area, which was primarily some perhaps Class A office like what we're in now, but also some other non-residential like retail and whatnot. And we're expecting at least one of these major employers to locate on the state lands. And our forecast potentially is significantly higher than the 7,000 jobs, which by the way was a 2040 forecast horizon. We're looking at something that could be north of 15,000 jobs just in that particular corridor. And if you land all 8 of these particular prospects, it's 22,000 jobs over 23 million square feet. So it's a massive and very, very exciting and encouraging level of sort of where we're at as a community and trying to position the community so that we're not disproportionately reliant on residential, because the key to really managing the community for the future is having a balanced fiscal plan. You don't want to be upside down and be too reliant on housing for the first 30 to 40 years of the sustainability of your community. And then the market, you build out, and well, where's your other resource to replace that housing that you had for the first 40 years, okay? So this jobs to population balance is an important ratio for us, but it's tough. It's really, really tough because you've got Mesa and their momentum and their ability to scale some of these particular employers. So how does a community like Queen Creek do that? Well, we've got wonderful partners with State Land Department. We've extended our utilities to these particular sites. Doing this other infrastructure, it's basically shovel ready and positioning the community ready to go. And we've got a great partner with ADOT for building of the freeway there. So that is really, the pieces of the puzzle are really starting to take shape. And the last thing I'll just mention on this, the proximity to Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport, ASU Polytechnic, we're taking advantage. That resource is profoundly significant to these employment prospects and what we're talking and who we're talking to right now. Because I agree with Bill, the labor force is the #1 challenge for virtually every industry right now. Housing, as well, as you all know, we're the difficulty meeting the demand of 2,000 permits a month, honestly, from a housing production standpoint. So those resources are wonderful to have in the region. We're benefiting from. So we're not necessarily looking at this particular question necessarily as exclusively a Queen Creek self-centered perspective. It's okay, how does this plan, these interests fit into the region, and how do we pull from the resources of the region, obviously our own, to be able to make this all work, you know? So it's really an interesting time.
It is.
Can I follow that
Yes.
again? So, two things any community should do very well. Invest in itself, infrastructure. Secondly is cut entitlement risk for the development community. Time is money, and as long as you plan it out and you still have a process, a public process to go through, you will see people start to flock to you, okay? You set it up for them to come to you. So I think that that's important. The other thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned some of these big employers. We're talking to the same ones and working about, and that's okay, we're fine. We're not going to land them all. He's not going to land them all. Yeah, well, that's what you have to do. But the point is, these are massive facilities. All of a sudden, 2,000 jobs seems pretty standard when I look at some of these leads. Think about that. So when you start to look at manufacturers, we're starting to change our focus and not just warehouse distribution. I want a higher value, higher wage job. I'm talking more manufacturing. So again, you're starting to see a little more dig in, a little bit different focus. But there are that many large projects with big square footage requirements, big infrastructure requirements, and a lot of jobs, a lot of jobs.
Yeah, thank you.
We got questions already.
So let's circle back around to State Land Department. You keep hearing state land, state land, state land. Mr. Edelman, let's start with, how is the state land different from public land or U.S. forest land or BLM land or any of the other lands that we hear?
I am glad you asked that. I'm not just saying that either, because that's usually my first slide when I give a State Land 101 presentation to a public council or board or just a neighborhood group. But it's very important to bring home the point that all the examples that you gave are public lands. They are in the public domain. State trust land is exactly what that means, is exactly what that says. It's land that was given to us by the federal government in trust, and it's held in trust for our beneficiaries. Now, and every acre has a designated beneficiary. Now, 83% of our acreage is designated to the K-12 schools of Arizona. So that's why you hear us say, hey, we're doing this for the kids. Because we are. We are also doing it for the universities. We are also doing it for the penitentiaries. We're doing it for the School for the Deaf and Blind, for the Pioneers Home, and several other beneficiary groups that we serve. And so that land really belongs to them. And we are the caretakers for that. I am a public employee. I work for the state of Arizona. But my job is to manage that land for highest return for those beneficiaries. So I have a fiduciary responsibility to manage the land and to always keep that going in perpetuity. We're a perpetual land trust. We were granted 10.5 million acres at statehood, 1912, and here we are today, over 100 years later, we still have 9.2 million acres in the portfolio. Now, so we still have a large bulk of that land, and if you think about Arizona, most of our land mass is in federal holdings: military, tribal, Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management. About 15% is in private holding, and about another 15% is in state trust. Well, that 30% right there is our economic growth for our future. And we take that responsibility very seriously, because you have your 15% of private land, and once that's done, we're going to grow onto the state trust lands. And so Bryant mentioned earlier the difficulty in our process. It was purposely made that way. We're state number 48. Starting with Ohio in 1807, states were granted lands for schools. Sometimes it was just said, here's the land, go manage it, make money for your schools. As time goes on, Congress gets to see how every single one of those states either manages or doesn't manage that grant. So when you get down to Arizona and New Mexico in 1912, actually 1910 was our enabling act, Congress put the toughest restrictions on us of any of the state trusts. So we were told, it's held in trust. You can only sell it at auction. You can only sell it if you publicly advertise it for 10 weeks. In a newspaper, we still have that rule. Yes. A lot of fun finding newspapers in communities sometimes now. One in the capital, one in the county seat. We still do our auctions in the county seat where the land is located. So we're still operating with what I call the 1915 rule book. That's when we were chartered. We are the original state agency. All of the resource agencies spun off from us. Forestry, water, agriculture, it all starts with the land. I probably got a little bit off there, but that gives you an idea of the land is in trust, and it's purposely made difficult to sell it because we want that asset to be there in perpetuity for when those large employers come or when a use comes, that the land is there and it's available to them, and it hasn't been moth-eaten around the edges by, well, I sold my brother 5 acres because he wanted to do a farm. This happened a lot in other states, or they would simply say, my cousin's got a great idea. Let's put this land out there and we're all going to get rich. Well, the land is gone and we never got rich, and so, well, the school kids can tough it. So that's why we have those tough rules, and we are a trust, and that's one of the reasons we're a little bit difficult to deal with. I'll also mention, you hear about us making these big land sales. We don't keep a dime. It all goes to the state treasurer. We are a general funded agency. So when I mentioned I don't have a staff, that's very common at the land department. We have, for all that 9 million acres, we have about 90 people. So we're on a general fund appropriation from the legislature, and we have to leverage that by working with these communities, working with private developers to get things placed, to set the stage so that when the growth comes to us, that we're ready for it. We're ready with flexible entitlements. That's been a big one. Back in the day, we used to go and get something zoned because that was the use of the day. Well, I got zoning for a 36-hole golf course sitting up in North Phoenix I can't do anything with. Okay? And now I have to go back and I am going to have to spend the public's money to get that rezoned, or I'm going to have to find a developer that wants that land and is willing to put up their money to go through that entitlement process. So we always have to leverage those partnerships with communities and with private enterprise to be able to have our land positioned so that it's ready when the development comes.
So one of the questions that comes up particularly in our community is we know that land can be leased, it can be sold, but the state land department seems to always be selling. So can you go through your process, how you make a decision, what land will be auctioned, why it is sold, not something else done with it?
We do have a leasing program. It's archaic, and basically it was somebody took probably our agricultural lease from the 1920s and crossed out the word ag and wrote in commercial, and that's how we do it. So it confers some unusual rights and some things like that that make it a little bit difficult to operate. especially since 2008, it's very hard to get an underwriter to do something that's on a land lease. They really want that developer to own the land that they're developing so that there's something there that they can take back if, God forbid, things go bad. We generally let the market come to us. We're application driven. We can initiate auctions on our own, but typically we want to see some demonstration that there is interest in this land, that there is somebody who's coming forward with a viable economic development idea. We get a lot of non-viable economic development ideas through our door. And I won't even go into any of those. So we're waiting for the market to demonstrate that to us. And then we go through an application process where they're going to do their due diligence. And then we're going to get a commercial appraisal based on that due diligence. And when we've all agreed on that appraised price and our Board of Appeals has agreed that that's a price to sell for, the commissioner will declare, yes, we are now going to have an auction. And that can start the 10 weeks of public advertising I mentioned before. Again, a 1915 procedure, but it's advertised for 10 weeks. And then at the end of that, if it's here in Phoenix, then everybody comes down to our basement at 1616 West Adams, and we have an open cry auction. People holding up paddles and people calling for bids. It's not quite as exciting as Barrett Jackson, but you can see a lot of big numbers getting thrown around that room. And sometimes, we'll see. Sometimes we just get one and done. We'll go, okay, well, we got money for that, and maybe the market wasn't quite there yet. We had an auction in Ahwatukee about 3 or 4 months ago that went on for almost an hour and 45 minutes, and close to 200 plus bids. Took it from 105 million appraised price to 175 million sale price. That's a pretty good payday for the kids.
Yeah.
And that's what we live for. It's along everything's along the 202, but this is at just west of 19th Avenue, so between 19th and 27th, south of Chandler Boulevard, about 370 acres. And Blandford Homes was the winning bidder.
Great. So when we talk about the roughly 2,500 acres that was auctioned off last fall, what were the indications, and how did you, as a state land department, we've heard about the cooperation that the cities are, and how they talk to you and you talk to them ahead of time. Talk to us about what the indication was to sell that land then, and how you were working from your side of the fence with the cities.
Okay. So Bryant mentioned before, we had a false start late in the cycle in the mid-2000s. We had a winning auction bidder who maybe their reach exceeded their grasp, or just the way that the world went in those days, and the project didn't make sense to them anymore. So we'd already been queued up once to get going with the city of Apache Junction. The general plan map you see on the cover of your programs, you can see that pretty much everything to the south within the AJ planning area is designated as master plan community. That's that flexibility we're looking for, rather than saying, here's the shops, here's the homes, here's the employment, and then having someone say, yeah, I don't want any of that. So we had that flexibility set up, and the wave had gotten to Apache Junction once already, so we knew it was coming again. It just took this cycle a little bit longer to get that good, head of steam behind it. But we knew starting about 5 or 6 years ago, when the developers of Eastmark were coming to us saying, we're doing pretty well at Eastmark, and believe it or not, we're going to be out of land, and we need to start thinking about Eastmark 2.0. So
I call Eastmark East. They call it something else, and that's still in the word. Yeah, well, they can call it whatever they want.
Yeah. What it's actually called is Superstition Vistas.
Yes.
That's a name that you'll hear applied to everything east of Meridian Road. And that's that whole 275-mile block that Bryant was talking about a moment ago. So we started talking with Brookfield Communities back then, started working about, well, how can this work? They have a business model that they need to follow. We need to get a return on our land. We need to show that we're doing right by our beneficiaries. So there's a lot of working. How do we structure this? And what we finally figured out, and this was also working with AJ, is that as you heard Bryant say, we sold. D.R. Horton was the winning bidder at that auction. We sold 4 sections of land, but we told the winning bidder, you're going to be obligated to zone and annex all of the state trust land that is between Meridian Road and the CAP Canal down to the 24. So we said, you're gonna get something out of this, but you're gonna get something for us out of this too. Because we want to build that base so that in now 7 years, when our agreement to not compete with those folks runs out, that we're ready and we're queued up to begin doing more homes, more employment in the SR 24 corridor, employment up in the north part, up by US 60, and then John mentioned Queen Creek. You know, we did that zoning in 2019, so we're south of the 24. We're also queued up now with flexible zoning that can support employment. And then in the last year, we've added the industrial component because we are getting that intense interest now from these large industrial employers who need large blocks of land. And it's pretty hard to find, you know, a section of land that isn't broken up in some way. And so when you get those large land users, a lot of times we're the only game in town unless they want to try and assemble, you know, several farms or something of that sort.
Great, thank you. So our cities have mentioned so far water and other infrastructure. So I'm going to ask these questions, and certainly all of you can chime in and give us your information. I'm going to start with Apache Junction because you are in Pinal County, and depending upon where you look at the map, the AMA is either a Phoenix AMA or sometimes Pinal AMA. You're sort of in that interesting area. But everyone wants to know about water. By now, a lot of people, if not most people, know that we are set for Tier 1 water cutbacks in January of 2022. So the question comes up, you're building these houses, what about water? So I want to throw it to you. You're building these houses, what about water?
It's a great one, and it's the number one concern right there in the top three. So Apache Junction, the area that we're talking about with the state land, one of the biggest confusing things, and one of the questions I do videos in our community, Great Day in AJ videos, John, you know, we do, and community is always asking this. And the area so the boundaries, active management area, doesn't follow county line. The county line has to do with 1912 on some jurisdiction. We are part of, in the city of Apache Junction, MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments. Very small portion of our city, but is in Maricopa County. But the air quality, land use planning, transportation planning connects with and is a part of Maricopa County. So 20 years ago, we became part of MAG. Our active management area, the Superstition Mountains, and the geology puts us in the Phoenix AMA. So for my other Pinal County city managers who really worry about this issue because of the stage 1 restrictions, I don't. We're just in a different, we're working with Mesa, we're working with the state land, we're working with the Phoenix AMA. It's a different, it's still a challenge, but not the same. And here's why. What Apache Junction isn't, is it's not farmland. We are rock solid. It is hard to develop east. If you go the old trail up towards the lake, good luck. I mean, we struggle up in that part of town to get sewer, and it's actually could end up being the greatest blessing for Arizonans 100 years from now. As a fellow Arizonan, to see that mountain, to be able to maybe think that it's just, let's plan differently and let's work south of 60, work with our partners on some of these issues with density and water. So we don't have the issues with stage 1 restrictions because the stage 1 restrictions deal with farmers, and it does not deal with our M&I, our manufacturing, industrial, and municipal water. So we are prepared that way. But that still doesn't deal with the bigger picture of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. But one of the things that I would like to share in this is that we're part of the Salt River Project. Salt River Project predates, actually, the agricultural district, power district predates the state of Arizona and has what I call quasi better than, what do we call it, state status in some areas. I feel like that they can and do some remarkable work with our watershed. And so they're working very hard to protect the forests and protect the lakes. We had a wonderful monsoon season. Roosevelt, follow Roosevelt, how full it's getting. And so what they're working on is an interconnect up by Red Mountain it's just massive, neat stuff in terms of engineering to get the water to come in through the Arizona Canal, the CAP working together, and then there's a switch where AJ and the Far East Valley can get connected and switch the water down to the southeast. And so we work really closely with SRP on that. We have our own designation for surface water with the CAP. And then we also work with trying to reduce the amount. We don't have a lot of swimming pools. We don't have a lot of lawns. We're going to really try to. We probably have one of the best per capita, per household water. We're right there with Tucson and Cape Creek in terms of about 99 gallons per day per capita. So.
And when it comes to water for Mesa?
Oh, John.
So it's certainly Tier 1 is something to pay attention to, but we find each community is in different shape for water. Some of the West Valley communities are different than the East Valley communities. Mesa's done a great job managing their water over the 100 years or so. What we're experiencing is a demand in Southeast Mesa, and I don't have the capacity yet. So we have an exchange program with Gila River Indian Community, actually, where they'll take gray water and we'll get potable water back. I have to get the pipe there first. So I think that's some of the challenges on infrastructure. You know, our water treatment plants are at capacity and the growth demands are such that hurry up, let's build this out. And that's not an overnight process. That's a 3 to 4 year process right now in this economy for a water treatment plant expansion. So I'm going from at Signal Butte and Elliott, a 24 million gallons a day facility to 48. It will still be 3+ years from now till we get to that point. To follow up on your SRP comment, we just had a water presentation to the City Council last week. Roosevelt's at about 70% full. SRP has done a tremendous job managing that water. The water in storage is better than it's been in a long time. So I think that's something you have to pay attention to. It doesn't solve the bigger problem, certainly. But I don't want to minimize that. But each community is in different shape, if you will. And I think for Mesa, they've done a tremendous job. I have to be careful from an economic development perspective, especially when you have large water users. You know, there was one that just came in, and Janine, you'll laugh at it, but you know, it's 900 and some odd thousand gallons, 900 and some odd thousand gallons a day, and I'm just going, yeah, I think I'm going to pass on this one just because I don't have the capacity today. So those are things you have to make. It's 600 well-paying jobs. I'm going to probably take a pass. So those are decisions you have to make along the way, but we're actually in pretty good shape. And we also have excess water in a different part of the city that I have to find a way to get it to southeast where the growth is. So that's something else to think about.
We'll be watching for that.
Yes.
And Queen Creek.
Yeah, water is on really everybody's mind. I'm not overly concerned about it from our community's perspective. We've been doing a lot of strategies and different diversification options that really position the community very, very well now. And then some of the different options that we're looking at for the future are also very, very encouraging with respect to what we're evaluating now. We're a member agency, one of the, I think, 2 in the entire Phoenix region within the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. So we're within the Phoenix AMA, of course. So there's a requirement for all of our new subdivisions to enroll. One of the things that we're working on now as a strategy is to try to diversify that and eventually get away from the CAGRD, the CAGR group, because of the rising costs of what's going to cost homeowners on the back end of their property tax bill to be still enrolled as part of that because of what they're forecasting for future water purchases, because that is going to be rising much faster, we believe, than our ability to acquire our own water, surface water from other sources. We're trying to diversify our overall supply so we're not groundwater pumping as much. Very much a concern for us. We're making a lot of progress on that. You might have heard about a little acquisition we're trying to do with a real estate group out of for Cibola on the Colorado River. We're making lots of friends as part of that particular process, but that's potentially an option, but it's a very, very, very small acquisition that we're looking at as part of the diversification strategy there. And that's within that particular possible acquisition to Queen Creek, where that farm we'd be buying their particular water and delivering it through the CAP and then back to our community. Our intent is to recharge the groundwater, the aquifer there. It's not used for new growth. So that's something we've been trying to make sure that's very, very much communicated with. But we don't know if that's going to be an outcome that's going to be favorable to us at all. It's right in the middle of the environmental process at the federal level. The Bureau of Reclamation has to make the final determination on that. But it's one of a whole series of different strategies that we're looking at as part of our water diversification strategy. But overall, I'm not overly concerned about that. Now, that may sound counterintuitive with respect to these different companies that we're looking at. Some are in the industries Mark mentioned relative to semiconductor and otherwise. Semiconductor industries, have a reputation for using a lot of water, high consumptive, and they need like super clean water as well. However, many of those particular companies have very, very progressive reuse strategies that are once the initial volume is provided, there's a reuse of that existing water, so there's not a net increase of more water, which is really, really helpful, and that's how the industry is starting to respond to these particular issues here, and why Arizona, in my view, is still on the map relative to interest by those companies, despite what you might be reading in the newspaper and online elsewhere with respect to water challenges in the state. So from Queen Creek's perspective, we feel we're in a really good place with respect to the strategy, what we have in place now. But again, we're looking at ways to even better position the community through some of these other alternatives.
Great, thank you. So we probably have about 10 minutes left, so probably one, maybe two questions. Before we get any further, I want to make sure I retouch over here with Apache Junction. And because of the new master plan community, you are writing new land use ordinance for that area. So tell us a little bit about your process for creating a whole new chapter in your code of ordinances and what that process is.
So Mark touched on this. The idea is to be able to give principles that we've talked about on the panel. The idea that I've been able to listen and watch carefully. Our city council has watched carefully the great work of our cities ahead of us, or in the curve. We want to be able to do what First Solar, that then became Apple, was able to do. And if I remember the story, I think it was the ability to have the zoning. Time is everything.
It was in place, yeah.
So the zoning was in place. They maybe said, here, we're going to, at one time, the Euclidean, that's the ability to have every corner have a commercial. We want our Safeway or whatever there. Didn't work out. And Elliott and Signal Butte, 1 mile west of AJ. And it didn't. And they said, well, we want First Solar to go there. And because of the way this ordinance is set up in place, the city of Mesa was able to move quickly. And so our mayor and city council want that same ability to be able to, that if a university that we're not even thinking of says we need to be close to that mountain, or we need to be close to that area, and we didn't quite know it, right, Mark? Right now, we have the zoning in place that provides goals, but I call it whack-a-mole. I don't know what else it could be called. It could be, the ability to say, well, we kind of think it's this, but we maybe, yeah, right? So this is where the housing really needed to be, and this is where D.R. Horton and Brookfield. And we haven't talked much about the 4 square miles. They're actually a joint venture. The 2 miles that are closest to Mesa or D.R. Horton, and then off of Ironwood would be Brookfield, which is the group that did Eastmont. Right. But beyond that, the other 6,000, the other areas, and then east of the canal, and then over to the north-south freeway and the 24, we have great hopes, but we don't know really what's going to happen. So you can't put into place some of those things. I think about when I grew up, how awesome it was to come into Safford, get on the 60, and we shopped at Fiesta Mall, right? Where else would I go?
Yeah.
We did. We were so happy there was a freeway at Power. We got on the trail. We got a Circle K and AJ. It was great. Get down, power, go over, and we shot. Well, now we're 30 years away, 50 years maybe, I don't know, from that. What was that zoning there? And I know I hear Chris, my counterpart in Mesa, man, if that could have been zoning, and what would we do? Well, we want to do that now so that the mall 150 years from now, or whatever it ends up being, can transfer. Should it be housing? Affordable housing. We have not touched on one of our biggest concerns that I worry about is, where are my kids, my grandkids going to afford to live? Right? And well, we have these places that could be, just got to think a little bit, creatively, but that's how we're trying to set up this zoning.
So we won't see the zoning codes that is going to be just one letter, one number, one letter, one number. What we'll see is a range. So when you hear the term flexible zoning or
Right.
something like that, what does that look like when we start to look at city code for our clients? How do we identify what's possible?
So in the area that's the annexed area, of course, we know more in the next 8 years what that's going to look like. We have it much more broken down. We don't have any designation beyond that, right, Mark?
Master
I mean,
plan
it's the
community.
master plan community. Would you call it bubbles?
Well, we got
Or-
some tables that say, hey, by the freeway, there's probably going to be more floor area for commercial uses and
Okay.
employment. But beyond that, no, it's unit counts, and same with our zoning in Queen Creek.
Okay, so there you
So we
go.
work closely
Same
with the
with our zoning
landowner
in
too.
Mesa.
So the landowner is just so important. And that's when you're talking about scale of this kind, you can do that kind of planning.
Which means that if you're a commercial agent, all of a sudden, that client that you've been having trouble finding that pigeonholed piece of property from, you can come and be more creative. And bring a proposal and know your proposal will be listened to, because you're looking at together to figure out where the best fit is. And it may turn out, in some cases, where the client's idea of where its best fit is may not be where the really true best fit is. I think I have seen more than one instance where cities have come in and said, that's a great piece, but maybe for what you're describing you want to do and the way you want to grow, here's another area you should probably consider. And that's
That's it.
part of what you get with this.
So we have economic development staff. Janine's here. We are constantly searching, working closely with each other, along with our partners at the state, to try to help that process when we have possible
That's terrific.
groups that come in. Yeah.
It's very helpful, very different way of doing things from a lot of areas. So just before we wrap up, I want to give each of our panelists a chance to tell us, what do you see this area being in 50 years? So let's start with Apache Junction.
All right. So
Wait a minute, my crystal ball's a little foggy.
yeah, it's way down, and so this was the hardest question we could answer. I'd like to think our mayor and council and our group have constantly talked about the preservation and the ability to the area that's east of our city towards the Superstition Mountains. I almost want to say that our council community say it doesn't change. I mean, but very little, and some changes there. But the integration or the folding in of these changes, we want to be world-class, the place where the valley can come and have fun, world-class launching off point to hiking, biking, the Canyon Lake, people are going to discover versus Saguaro as this happens, and the mountain. We're working closely to work on that. And then I think the ability down south to work on a place where families and all types of generations can come and be a part of the beauty of the Far East Valley. I think that we're going to see that the Phoenix Mesa Gateway be almost like for Apache Junction, that maybe people in Chandler view Sky Harbor. That's going to be their airport. That's going to be where we go. To us, I mean, Power Road, that's way west. And so, sorry, buddy. But the question is for Apache Junction, what do we see in 50 or 100 years? That's where their community is going to be, and we want to set up a great place for people to be able to live and enjoy their families there.
Great. And Mesa.
Bill?
How do I handle that one? I want to know if whack was in your definitions on your, anyway. So I guess what I envision, and you have to stop and think about how development changes in different cycles, and who knows what's going to happen in 50 years, but I look at what Mesa's done from growing from West Mesa to East Mesa, and when you stop and think about the success of Eastmark, we talk about flexible zoning, development units. In each development unit has X amount of square footage of different types of development. That can be moved around. That's that flexibility that you will probably be seeing something similar to on this piece. I think you're right. Take advantage of those natural resources that you have. That's huge. You know, when we looked at, you know, okay, it used to be a GM proving ground. That's nice. We're going to recruit it on the racetrack? No. But they came in with, you know, this master plan on housing. Hey, there's big power that exists, and there's infrastructure here in terms of water capacities and different things. Take advantage of those, I think, will be important for you. So I think you'll see a continuation of what's happened in Eastmark in just a newer, more modern form over 50 years. And I do agree with you, Eastmark, and it's not going to take 50 years. There's things going to explode in and around. If you haven't driven by it, I was amazed on my way down this morning from Northeast Mesa. Yes, I live off of Power Road in the north corner, so I was on the west side of Far East Mesa. Anyway, Far East now. But I think what you'll see is that development continue in and around the 202, but now you'll start to see things happen on the airport. And I think those, I can tell you from the inside perspective, they're perched and ready to go, and you guys are, you know, both members of the airport, so you know what's going on airport. And then south of the airport, you'll see develop differently, and that will all influence what's happening further to the east as well.
And Queen Creek?
Oh, important question, a tough one. You know, there's three cosmic measures that I watch and have been monitoring for the many years that I've been in the community, but it has to do with median household income, median age, and educational attainment. Those three ingredients, for me, are really the key that speak to the values of your community and where you want to position your community from a competitive standpoint within that, the larger Phoenix economic sort of engine. And if we can preserve, to the greatest extent possible, those particular characteristics and the strategies that maintain that over a period of time, we're going to be in a good place here 50 years from now. And that includes some of these employers that we're talking to and other pieces and parts of the infrastructure. And a key partner on this is our K through 12 educational partners. That stays strong. We're going to be in a very good position, and even taking it to a next level if that's even possible to do from where we already rank. But for the region, this may not be a description that the group may appreciate, but based on what we're seeing with respect to we're on Gateway, what Mesa's doing, what we're seeing by way of potential economic development, whatever you think of the Los Angeles area, this looks like, for me, the next 50 years, an Inland Empire 2. Yes. And particularly you look at the rest of that state lands area with another 275 square miles, which is about the 5th largest economic center in the entire country, by the way, today.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Edelman.
When I look at the pieces that are there today, the airport, the freeways that are being developed, the arterial roads that are being completed, the rail lines that are being extended and completed, I think you have all the ingredients there. This will not be a bedroom community, probably not even in 20 years. This is going to be a true live, work, play area. I think it's going to be a dynamic center, another economic center of the Phoenix Valley, just like we have downtown Phoenix, Scottsdale Air Park. You're going to have the Far East Valley with Mesa Gateway Airport being in the center of it all, and then everything's just going to build out from there. And just because of the resources and the tremendous, you know, as Bryant said, you know, the backdrop is stunning. I would say probably even more. I probably even enjoy that more than the McDowell Mountains when I get to go out there and just look up at Flatiron Rock.
Nice, thank you. Well, I'm so glad you all could join us. Please thank our panelists.